So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to kind of sit up here with you and ask you a couple questions. Some of the staff members and obviously some students have some questions as well. We have some runners in the audience, and Sean Reinhardt will run around with the mic as well. So as we go, so if you would, you can have a seat though. But.
I hate these chairs.
So for those who don't know, my name is Ken Norman. I'm a course director in character rigging in the 3D arts program. So with her teaching rigging, it kind of makes sense to ask a couple of questions. We have some rigging students in there, and I know a couple of questions that I know even students in general that don't even do rigging but do 3D industry in general, they want to know, how do you handle the stress of a deadline? Yeah.
Planning. So I'm a little scatterbrained, so I write everything down. And then whenever I'm like, what? It has to be done by 4. I look and I pre-planned it all on the bus that morning. I know exactly what I need to have done by 4 o'clock. That's another thing, the stress of a deadline, always plan to be finished by 4. And then when something goes wrong, which it always does, then you still have time.
Yeah, that's good. Some other questions. Students always tell us they love rigging when it's not breaking. So, and then I always tell them rigging is breaking. So I guess they want to know more about the problem solving. How do you deal with problem solving, your approach?
That is really true. Rigging is just breaking. Things break all the time for all different reasons. Sometimes it's your fault, sometimes it's the person next to you, and sometimes it's some person that you never met. It's their fault.
Nice.
I think the key thing is just patience. So to try to keep calm and think about it logically. I think sometimes it's easier. It's really easy when there's this really abstract problem and you don't know why it's breaking, and you're trying to deliver something, they're waiting for you and there's something broken, and it can be quite tricky. But I think what I try to do is just take a breath, look at the problem, and think, what do I need to accomplish? What am I trying to do? And that is the key. Just figure out, what is the goal? Mm-hmm. And then you can kind of work back from that. Because I think sometimes it's easier to, look at a really complicated problem and just get, overwhelmed. And when things are breaking, it's particularly so. So I think the key thing is just to keep a cool head and start with a logical approach. Don't just have a default approach where you just go back to the beginning and do each step, because that can waste a lot of time. So the key thing is read the error messages, figure out what the most likely situation is, and then work from there.
That's good. I guess another question most people are probably wondering is how fast? How long do you actually get to rig a face? Do they give you a week? Is it 40-hour week, months?
It's different for every character and every project. For example, let's see. The last face that I rigged was a dragon for 47 Ronin, and I wasn't even supposed to be on that show. But they asked me to come in and help out, so I had 2 weeks to rig the face, which is a accelerated face rig. So that's a particularly short one. But some face rigs last a lot longer. So, Dobby and Creature, their face rigs, it was probably about a 6 to 8 month process. And that includes multiple people. That's not just one person, that's multiple people. Because there was no facial capture involved whatsoever. So everything was modeled by hand, all the expressions, all the animation was keyframe animation as well. And there was this really small core team of people working on it for a year, and the facial rigs were in development over a 6 to 8 month period intensively.
Another question, how long is your work week? Is it 40, 60 hours?
It's 50. So it typically, as a standard, it's 50, and then we have month periods. It's in the last maybe 7 years since I've been at Framestore, those 5 after Tale of Despero. We go through periods of maybe 3 months out of the year where we're doing 6 days and working 12 hours a day. But that's pretty much as bad as it gets these days. So it's quite reasonable. I think it's a little bit different as well because it's a really big company and they have a lot of employees. And also the UK has a lot stricter labor laws than the US does, which we benefit from. So it's actually okay. You know what I mean? It's it doesn't. You still have your weekends for the most part, and when you don't, when you do have to come in, they give you like a day off later when it slows down. So it's quite reasonable.
Well, at this time, we'll take a couple from the audience.
Hello, I'm Natalie. I had a question. When making a facial rig, is it more joint driven or blend shape driven?
I use blend shapes. I think joints are, or deformers or muscles, have a lot of benefits. But in my experience, I prefer blend shapes because it's like really direct. It's like you can work, you can get what you want like immediately. And I really like that sort of satisfaction, that gratification. Like I think the tricky thing about blend shapes is that since you have so many inputs, you have to blend them all like through sculpting, which is great, but it's tricky. With joints, you sort of, or muscles, you're sort of mixing weight maps, and then you have to go in and specify the behaviors of all of the joints. So it's still really intensive, I find, but the control that you have is not as direct because you paint a weight map for one muscle, and that affects many, many expressions. Whereas if you edit one blend shape, it's going to affect that blend shape, that expression, and only the expressions that include that shape. So it's a little bit more direct.
I wanted to ask you, why did you choose to work in the UK instead of the United States? Is there a specific reason, or was it a convenience?
I didn't think about it that much. I lived in LA, and I was working at like a boutique studio, and we were doing a test for a feature animation project. And we went into pre-production on it, and I modeled half the characters and modeled half their blend shapes and rigged half the characters. And they asked me if I wanted to come to London where they were holding the production. The reason why they were moving to London is because there's tax incentives for large productions, which a lot of people take advantage of, including this company. So basically, they asked me to come for rigging support for 6 months. And I've been there for nine and a half years. I love it. That's why I'm there.
I think there was another one right here somewhere.
I want to talk about tracking. What problems do you come across? Like, if you can't get a clean track, what are some alternatives you can do to, to fix that?
Well, I'm not going to be able to get too far into tracking detail. My first job was as a tracker, but I was like super junior. So what I do is I'm trying to, we provide rigs for trackers all the time at their request. So they need rigs to put the character in shot to do match move. They, in this case, they generated whatever tracks they could pull from those plates. And that presented an issue because it's really inconsistent. And we had, in some other shows, like Framestore worked on Batman, they worked on Harvey Dent. And I didn't personally work on it, but the approach that they took for tracking is they like regenerated the rig per shot based on what tracking points were there. So I never like to like run processes like on the fly if I can help it, because I feel like I can't control it. So in this case, we design a rig to just be adaptive to whatever tracks they could pull. So yeah, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question more directly than from my role in that.
Well, while they're finding somebody else, I have another question. When you were here last time, you talked about the fax system. Could you explain a little bit more about that for some students that don't know what that is?
Oh, yeah. Well, if you don't know what that is, you should totally look anyway, because Paul Ekman is my idol, and he designed the fax system. So fax is facial action coding system, and essentially it was developed, as I said, by Paul Ekman in the 1970s. And he was a psychology dude. He was like doing his project on emotive expressions. And he was trying to prove that human expressions are an innate part of humanity, and they're not learned through society. So he was going to these remote colonies and these tribal villages, and trying to understand if they recognized happiness as a smile, or was there some other weird random expression that they used to read that expression from people. So from that base, he started dissecting, theoretically, the components of a face that produces these expressions. So essentially what he did was make a mechanical map of the face. So the facial action coding system is a code for a combination of muscles that produce an expression. He was really the first person to commit to mapping out the face. We see Grey's Anatomy of the body all the time, but when do you really see that stuff for the face? You don't see it that often. And he sort of pioneered that in the 1970s. And the way that relates to us is, as riggers, when you're dealing with deformation, you need key components that you can produce individually that will give you a fully well-deforming object. So to have someone who spent 7 years of their life designing that, it's like a godsend, so it's awesome. But it's really interesting anyway. There's lots of stuff online that you can see. And you'll probably, if you have any interest in facial animation or facial rigging, if you haven't come across it yet, you are bound to. So you might as well just Google it now.
Is there any more from the audience?
I got one right here. You said that, what was it? You had a main goal in mind if you had a problem, and you said keep your eyes on the main goal. But is there any other questions that you ask yourself in particular when you have a large problem besides what is the main goal here?
Well, I think the key thing is that I find the way that my brain works and the way that I can communicate ideas to other people is through design. So, if I see some big, huge issue, you can only do one thing at a time. You can't, if you look at things as a whole all the time, they can be really daunting and you won't know where to start. So there's, through production experience, you sort of know that there's a logical beginning, and that's modeling. So that's where you start, or design as the first, and then modeling. But that's sort of one and the same these days. So for larger problems, I would think about chunks. If you can't, you go, okay, I have a new character to rig. What is the goal? Create a character rig. That's not really going to help you. So chunk, break it into chunks, break it into tasks, and then for each smaller, more manageable problem, then decide on what you're trying to accomplish with that problem. But chunks, yeah, break it up and try to think about ways to design the chunks so that they're complementary and there's as little overlap and as little dual effort as possible, and they're in the right order and you're talking to the right people at the right stages. So it's basically design your process and then think about each thing individually.
Hi. You mentioned the Framestore studios in LA, New York, and Montreal. How likely is a pipeline that covers, travels across each one? A shot that starts in LA going to New York, Montreal, so it covers more of the workday across the globe?
Well, it's not as high tech as you might think. To be honest, the LA office is more commercials, so they're not interacting with us in the film department. The New York office is, however, and what we do, part of production is like, I'm in builds. That's like the production term for it. That's what the producers are like, oh, yeah, just send it to the builds list. Sorry, I know that didn't make any sense. Anyway, so that's a logical way to break up a shot, is put the work for building the assets and building the character, designing the character in one place, and then do the shot production in another place. So that way the workflows, there's not, like those are the two chunks. You know what I mean? Like they don't overlap that much. But for example, there's a show which is not really set. It's called The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And we did, we have recently worked on that, and we were sharing it with the New York office. So what we did was we built the models and the rigs for the digital doubles in London, and then we interacted like over phone conference and stuff like that to help design the rigs, figure out what the needs were, and then we'd send it. At first, we were sending it like just on FTP sites. So just big files, like server, take it, look at it, open it in Maya, no plugins. You know what I mean? We'd also we'd send them our software too, so that we could have plugins working, thankfully. But only recently we've had a shared database. So it's been kind of like a technological push the last year to get this sync between the database so that we don't have to have duplicate assets on two different continents. But it's not as high tech as you might think. It's we still know our roots. We'll still pass files around.
What is the difference between a regular rig and a collision rig?
Well, it depends. But I think what you're asking is, a collision rig would be what I would call a CFX rig, which is basically something that either we in rigging or the creature effects TDs build to help their simulations. So that is not necessarily included in the character rig, which is for a different department. It's for animation. The way that at Framestore in our pipeline, the way that we communicate the 3D elements from department to department is through like mesh caches. So our rig is going to input animation and output mesh caches. And then the mesh caches will be the input to the creature department, creature effects, and they will output mesh caches. So so I guess the difference between the rigs is a creature effects rig inputs a mesh cache and not animation.
Yeah, you mentioned yesterday how you communicate with the character modeler with like edge flow, what's desired. Is there anything else you discuss alongside that with them?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the show, but we have design input as riggers a lot because with deformation, like we learn a lot about anatomy. So, but we don't know everything. You know what I mean? So, and neither does the modeler. The modeler knows a lot about anatomy, but they don't necessarily know a lot about facial structure. You know what I mean? So we work with them, and we look at the forms of the model and the definition and the like bony landmark placement. We make sure that everything is like functioning. We try to get at Framestore, the modelers try to get as much like anatomical information into the models as possible. So not only are we dealing with topology, but we're also dealing with the form and the design. Also, depending on the simulation process or how we're going to treat things like jiggle and skin slide, we might need like multiple types of the same model that have different edge flows or different resolutions. And then also, they are maintaining consistent UV maps for us so that we can transfer weights and do whatever we want with our UV maps so that we have a little bit more freedom beyond the topology and the world space shape. And then blend shapes. We reel them in for blend shapes as well.
You specialize in faces and human figures. Do you ever do anything inanimate to animate like a building, and if you do, how would you approach that? Or do you mainly just concentrate on face?
Lately I've been doing a lot of body deformation, but I'm typically character focused. Inanimate objects. If you are the lead rigger on a show, then the show has an array of different needs, and that includes props and doors, and we rig those as well, but they don't take us long.
While he's passing the mic, just one more quick question. I know a lot of people are probably even too scared to ask. You specialize in face. Would you want to see a facial demo reel? Would somebody just apply for facial rigging at Framestore?
Well, I'll tell you what, it does not happen very often. And when it does, everybody watches it. And that's true. And when it does happen, small percentage of them have I think a lot of people who start experimenting with facial rigging deals so much with the technical side of it, like how do we input motion capture? How do we automatically build a muscle system based on anatomical landmarks? They focus so much on that they forget to make it look awesome. So yeah, I'm always interested in seeing face reels, and particularly deformation-focused face reels, because I think one thing that rigging in general needs more of is aesthetic people who know what looks good. Particularly, obviously, on the deformation side. But yeah, they're really like, riggers are artists, but they tend to have a tech-savvy focus. So whenever really good deformation comes through on a reel, it's like a flag, and people watch it and they're interested because it's not that common. You'd think it would be more, but there's not that many riggers in the world, and an even smaller amount that have a good aesthetic sense and a really good logical approach to technical problems.
I'm not sure how Ken does this, but every time I have a question, he seems to ask it as soon as I get the mic. Mind reader he is. Anyways, so we're going to go along the same concept of the demo reels. I've seen a lot of demo reels lately for rigging, because I'm going to build a reel for when I graduate, and they're all pretty much the same thing, auto rigging. They all want to click one button and make the entire body of a bipedal, and it's kind of getting boring. So I'm wondering if you could kind of guide me how I might want to set up a unique one that would be also generalized enough so I wouldn't look like I'm trying to take someone's position. And I would like to come in as an entry-level guy. So, yeah.
Well, I have to say first that I work at a big company. So we're always looking to fill specific roles when we're reviewing demo reels, but that's not the case in many entry-level places, because a big company is not typically an entry-level place unless you're coming in as an intern or I was just speaking with someone with the recruiting agent at Framestore, and she was saying really the only external people they hire for junior positions is for paint, roto, and tracking. So if you want to be a junior rigger, having that ability to create auto riggers and rig a whole character quickly, that's what people want from a rigger when they first hire them. However, as you said, it gets a bit boring. So what's going to make your reel better than the next person's? I would think that, that's my phone, sorry. I would think that if you have a particular interest, focus on that and make something special out of it. And that can be like, it has to be visual, obviously, because it's a demo reel. So think visually. Think like, what is going to look cool, and how can I design this interface? And how can I, when I'm doing my screen capture to demo this on my demo reel, how can I like make it be like boo, 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 boo? You know what I mean? And just to put like, I always tell people, put the IK, FK switch stuff at the end. Like, don't put that first. Everybody can do that. Put the stuff that nobody else has, and that is awesome, first.
Hi, how's it going today? My question would be, when you're working with the Animator 4-face rig, how intuitive, or if at all, do you make curves for that face, or is it more of attribute driven, or is it back and forth with the animator to work on that?
My face rigs typically are control driven. Attributes are good when it starts getting clogged. And I think it depends on the animator, but typically they're happy to use controls. To be honest, whenever I presented a control rig, they don't typically like turn around and say they want attributes. I think they like to have the interactivity of control on the face. However, there's two issues with it, and one is, as I said, it gets clogged, and it like sort of can be distracting and give a false sense of movement. But also, when you put a control directly on the face, they expect it to move with the control exactly, which if you're sort of doing more of an anatomical approach, that's not the way it works. So designing that system so that it's interactive but makes logical sense when you're moving the things around. Like, I don't have any controls that are up, down, left, right, unless I'm not guaranteeing the deformation. But typically it'll be, a control driving the muscle in a particular direction, and it doesn't necessarily go the other way.
I got a question. As I'm running across the room, I'll just ask it. Tell me about living in London. Cost of living, how it is, and just the vibe there.
I love London. It's really a great place to be. It's like got so much to offer. There's so much to do all the time. There's lots of free stuff to do. Like, the people are really friendly and cool, but they're also very sophisticated. And the neighborhoods, it's kind of like New York in a way, like it's like neighborhoods. And each neighborhood has its own identity, and it's very rich and very packed and very expensive. But so the cost of living there is high. It's very high. But at the same time, there's public transport that's really good and affordable. And there's all the museums, typically most of them are free. You can get culture in London just walking down the street, so for free. So if you can get there, even to visit, the expensive part is the staying in the hotel and flying. But once you're there, you can do it pretty on the cheap.
So book your tickets now.
Hello. About the facial rig, you rig following a storyboard, or you just rig a character, all expressions?
For feature animation projects or more cartoony characters, typically we'll be looking at art. So we'll have our animators draw things that they want to do. We'll be looking at the storyboards. But on visual effects projects, At Framestore, we have a little bit more responsibility than that regarding us and the animators and the modelers, but we sort of put our heads down and the modeler will like create a sculpt in a full expression, and they'll sort of dissect that with the designer or the animator to see if that's where we're going. And then it'll be up to us to, as riggers, to sort of break that down and build something that can achieve that. So typically we work more in 3D. Also, we try to do the look development of the characters early in the production if we can, because there's nothing worse than waiting like 8 months to get an image. So we try to get the look development happening early, and the best way to do that is with sculpts. So yeah, I would say feature animation, yes, but visual effects, it's a little bit more sculpt-based.
I have a question here. How much of your work is done through scripting, and how is being in the industry, being a woman, the experience?
Scripting can be your whole day if you wanted it to be, but I don't. But you do have to do it. I mean, sometimes it can be fun, and I don't script every day. I try not to because it's easy for me to get sucked in because I want to like clean everything. I want to like reorganize every time I open something that's old. I want to like redo it. So it can be quite time consuming to do that. But you can go through like weeks, max, where you're not writing a significant amount of code other than just writing loops to do your job. But yeah, beyond that, you can also spend, I mean, it depends on your role, but if you're developing something, if you're developing a tool or workflow, then you'll be writing a lot of code because you have to be able to regenerate it, because our projects last for a long time. So everything has to be in a format that you can rebuild at any time. We have fully modular and fully scripted rigs. So we don't do anything manually other than once or twice, max. Third time, you gotta write it. So on the female side of things, it's similar proportion to Full Sail. For example, like we've got 3 floors in our office, and there's only ladies' room on one of those floors. But I would think, the thing is I think women, there's a lot of like, in my opinion, I think women are different in the workplace. And I think that's a good thing. Like, I think me and the other women in the office bring something to the table and a different way of looking at things and a different way of working, that we add something, you know what I mean? And I also find that when you start a new job, it takes a little bit of extra effort to get some respect. But you get it in the end, so you kind of just have to be patient. And also, if women have tantrums, it's like way worse than if a guy has a tantrum. Like it like lasts, like your legacy of tantrum lasts a lot longer.
Okay, so from what I've heard from my friends that were able to make it to your Q&A session, the Medusa was like your most challenging rig. Which one was your favorite? Like, do you have a favorite of the ones that you've worked with so far? Which one was the most enjoyable?
I really like working on like short stuff, like short projects, because then I don't like obsess about everything. So I don't know. I think like the little tests that have never been released are my favorite. They're like forbidding, like to get projects in. We'll do like a little test. Those are usually my favorite. But since you haven't seen any of those, I would think that I like doing cartoons. And I know it's like totally different than what I'm doing now, but I find it more relaxing if I can make it up instead of copy. If I'm trying to like make something look exactly like this, I find that more stressful and difficult than if I can just make it up. And that's why I like cartoons, because I can do what I think looks good. So by that standard, I would say probably one of the Despero rigs. I did a bunch of them, and I can't even remember which ones I did now. But one of those that was really fun, and we had a good toolkit. You know, it was like really interactive. Basically, you could like push a button, go into edit mode, and sculpt, and then push it back, and it's like working in the rig. And I like that level of interactivity. So yeah, probably one of the Despero rigs. And Dobby, I really enjoyed as well. Dobby was good because I came into the project quite late, and I was able to see the work that had already been done and push it and improve it. And I think sometimes when you have a really long stint on a project, you're like chipping away at something, and you need like those fresh eyes at different points in the project to look at it and go, okay, what is missing? And it's hard to do that if you're working on the same thing every day for a long period of time. So.
How often do you use expressions in your rigs?
Almost never. I have a few rigs that use expressions, but to be honest, I'm not very good at math. So I don't have an instinct for writing expressions, and I don't think about things like that. So I would rather build it in a way that if something's wrong, I can debug it easily. I like node-based things. Obviously, sometimes they're faster, sometimes they're slower, and when we're optimizing things, we may move things to or from expressions. But I think currently our pose reader system is expression-based, but I didn't write any of that, but it's definitely a part of the... Also, one of my rigs that expression-based is my sticky lip system. So I think that's about the only expression that I use on a regular basis.
I have a question. Has anything ever surprised you from what you created? You're like, I didn't know it could do that, or after you saw it, you're like, those animators, I can't believe what they did.
They always do that. I mean, when they have time, there's really amazing character animators at Framestore, and they would always put out incredible work if they had time to do it. So I think, yeah, sometimes they just, yes. Like, I remember once on Despero, I had rigged his face, and I saw, we have like this like web-based intranet where we can see all the dailies work that's coming through. And I saw this shot that he had made, and it was just, I like shots that are like, just kind of, the camera just stays there and watches the character. And he had Despero like eating his dinner in like the cutest way I've ever seen. And he was like chewing, and he was like, meow, meow. And I was like, whoa, I didn't even like try to make him chew. And it looks awesome. It's like he was using the squash and the stretch like in just the right way. And yeah, I was really impressed. But they always impress me. They always do really good work.
Hi, I'm over here. Yesterday, Jeremy Vickery of Pixar mentioned they don't necessarily have riggers in their character department. It's the modeler and rigger share the same hat. How likely do you foresee that being an evolution of a rigger in the future?
I think there's a lot of that. I think it's a natural way to do it. I think the reason why we innately split it is because of time. So like I was just talking about, blend shape modeling, I think is kind of a good example of that. I mean, I work on the models a lot, and I'll sit there and cut the topology, and I'll resculpt things and send it back, and we'll talk about it. So I think it's a natural thing, and it makes a lot of sense, and it's probably way more efficient, meaning there's less duplicate effort. So they're probably, I think it's super logical. I think the main reason why we split it is because of time. We don't get a lot of necessarily enough time to do the whole pre-process and the whole production. A lot of times we get moved around for our specialist skills from project to project, and we have a ton of other. We don't just work on one character. Usually we have got many, like I was saying earlier, we have a whole show that we need to manage, and they have lots of different daily changing expectations and needs. So yeah, I think it's a really natural way to work, and I think if you're a rigger, you should know how to model, and maybe you don't have that perfect, well-developed sculptural skill, but you can develop that, and I think modelers have a little bit less need to know about rigging, but they should have an idea of deformation. And if you're dealing with a character, you should know your anatomy and you should know like how things work in the body. If you're a character modeler, so yeah, I do.
Hello. Yes. Also, yesterday, Jeremy Bakery said that as far as animation, sometimes they animators from ILM apply and they get rejected because realism is not exactly what they're looking for in Pixar. I wanted to know, as far as when you look for an when you look at an animation demo reel at Framestore or another VFX house, what are you looking for?
I don't know if I can answer that one because I don't hire animators.
Yeah. Thank you.
But I mean, to be honest, I think they look for a good sense of movement and good like understanding of the principles of animation, and also people that they know they like. But I don't know particularly because I don't hire animators, so I'm sorry I can't answer that one very well.
What advice can you give a beginner or enthusiast rigger, like what to expect in the workplace and what can make them more competitive?
I think when you're starting out, speed is everything. So get fast and understand what is going on. There's plenty of documentation. You can figure it out. Like, understand what you're doing when you're creating IK. Understand like the way, at least basic understanding of the way that deformers work. Understand like enough that you can invent things on the fly in a quick way and you're comfortable. I would just say practice being fast and also work on ways to build up a library of things that you do a lot before you go in to a company, so that you don't have to sit there and string bash. You can you've got a little mail library or something that can help you out to do repetitive tasks so that it doesn't suck up your time and you can be quick.
All right, everybody. I think that's all the time we have for today, but can we give her one more round of applause? Again, Laurie, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for showing us the awesome stuff and always answering questions that the students just throw at you, it's on spot. So again, thanks, and that concludes our actual presentation for the Framestore, and have a great day.
Thanks, guys.